You're listening to the Zipline Logistics Truck Yeah podcast, where we explore all kinds of hot topics in the logistics industry. Get ready to learn, laugh, and get your freight on. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of the Zipline Logistics podcast. I'm joined, as always, by our Director of Training and Development, Teddy Lee Knox. Teddy, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Great. How are you?
Wonderful. We've got a special guest today, returning guest, I believe,
Yes.
Andrew Lynch, the president of Zipline Logistics. Andrew, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here. Second time on the pod.
Very, very exciting. Recurring guest. We're going to have to create a whole new segment for this. But we're talking today, I would call it a hot topic in the world of logistics. The recent shutdown of a large 3PL, right? A tech 3PL. Is it just Convoy or is it Convoy
I
Freight?
think it was just Convoy.
All right, we'll call them Convoy. For those who don't know, they were a company at one point valued at $3.5 billion, had raised roughly $1 billion in funding. I believe at the time of shutdown, it was close to $800 million in revenue. And then a few weeks ago, ceased operations. So we certainly empathize with the employees there. It's been a tough year here in 2023, certainly, with the cost of freight. But Andrew, what are your initial thoughts on that shutdown and the implications for the freight market as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on Convoy's shutdown. I think first and foremost is obviously just empathy for the people that are left behind, and maybe even more empathy for the carriers that are potentially, going to have to now go, chase down some money that they're owed, which, in this trucking environment is really perilous time for anybody in the asset side. So, those are my initial thoughts. I think its effect on the industry, look, this is a massive industry, right? Arguably $1 trillion, so when you see a $1 billion participant disappear, yeah, I mean, I think that sounds splashy, but in the grand scheme, it's not really going to have much of a market effect. And I think that,
right,
whatever market effect we were going to see, we have already seen. Convoy did have a bit of a niche in short haul. They had certainly a leg up in that specific sort of part of truckload transportation. And I'd imagine that there have been a little bit more waves in that space than there were elsewhere. But on the macro, I don't see there being much change at all.
Short haul, you're talking less than 250 miles or like 500 miles and less? Just to clarify.
I think it was less than 250 would have been where they would categorize it. I think I would probably even shrink that further and say that it was really like a lot of kind of local
moves.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess that's connecting the dots on their tech platform, that you're a driver that's maybe based in Chicago. You got to go out to one of the suburbs and you're just looking for a quick hitter to get back to home or something like that. And
yeah, and it's a good place for an app driven environment to live, right? I mean, a traditional Uber. Right. It's an easy place for that environment to perform.
Teddy, any thoughts?
Well, something we were talking about before we started the podcast is why this may have a bigger impact on the market than Yellow's shutdown did, or like, I guess, more noise around it. Maybe not more of an impact, but definitely more noise around it compared to other companies that have had a similar end.
Yeah, I to me, I think it's about like sort of the cultural zeitgeist of trucking and that or transportation, that people have been in the marketplace selling the idea that technology is going to solve your problem, or that technology today that exists right now is in and of itself a solution. That has just kind of always been bullshit. No doubt that at some point in our future, there will be, fully automated transactions that deliver the type of visibility that's been promised by these platforms. But we're just as far from that as we are from the world being completely taken over by completely autonomous trucks, right?
Yeah.
The concept that so many, I think, of the companies, the 3PLs that have positioned themselves as sort of tech first, all of their pitch decks started the same way. They all started with transportation hasn't been innovated since the 80s. That on its face was always nonsense. Mm-hmm. Transportation has been innovating since the 80s. It's always been innovating. As we look at, sort of the history of innovation in transportation and some of the great companies that have been well-run and profitable companies for years and years and years that are, in the, Fortune 100, those companies have been innovating the entire time, right? And so have folks like Zipline, right? I mean, we started building out Canopy long before Convoy existed or Uber Freight existed. We have had digital freight matching as a part of our operations for, 7 years, 8 years.
Ever
right?
since I've been here, we've done that. I've seen the industry change so much in my years here, and it's definitely before, like after the 80s. So
Yeah,
there's been a lot of changes.
Just for clarification, after the 80s.
After the 80s, yes, long after the 80s. And I just think that the reason that it's so impactful in people's mindsets is that what was being sold out there was the idea that this is it. This is what the future looks like. And I can say here at Zipline, and I don't think that, it's being tooting our own horn, that we've always said that the future of logistics is not just technology. It's applying that technology in a meaningful way for a subset of transportation buyer that needs it to be utilized in a specific way, right? So again, every tool that's out there in the marketplace selling itself as a full suite solution, what they really are tools in a tool belt. And at Zipline, we apply those tools in a way that benefits consumer goods, healthcare, retail suppliers, in a way that it wouldn't be deployed in the same way that would benefit, aluminum recycling shippers or plastic scrap shippers. So, but if those are your value sets, right? If you're a plastic scrap shipper that just needs the absolute cheapest, yeah, hey, these guys that aren't going to touch your freight at all and aren't going to track it and are just going to digitally match it, like, yeah, there's a real value for you there. But that's a narrowing of the field that I just don't think people were honest enough about when companies like Convoy were out raising money. Selling this as a full solution when it's really just a tool, I think is what caused them to get so huge, and also what maybe made their downfall look so dramatic.
And that's the trick of selling an intangible service, right? You need to give someone something to hold on to. And if that's true or not is the trick, I guess. Or 100% true.
Yeah. I mean, are you delivering value for somebody or are you not? Right. And look, I mean, so many lessons here, right? I think it was Journal of Commerce that published that Convoy was spending like $1.47 for every dollar in revenue that it was bringing in, meaning that it was selling the idea that you could commoditize trucking. And look, I think that there have been so many attempts to cast trucking services and transportation services as a commoditized space over the years, and that really I see Convoy and Uber Freight, at least in their first iteration, as just different versions of that in techier clothing, right? It's wearing a black turtleneck now. The reality is that transportation is not a commodity, right? A commodity has a definition, right? It's that there are no differences between item A and item B except for price. That's how you define a commodity, right? In transportation, I think anybody who's in this space knows that there's a massive spectrum of communication and service and visibility and quality in drivers and capacity.
Yeah. That,
you have to be selective on who you work with and how you deploy that capacity for the right customer. What Convoy wanted to do was say, hey, yeah, we can deliver you this world-class A+ service at, C- bottom dollar pricing, because we're going to automate everything and we're not going to touch the freight and we're not going to track it ourselves, right? Everything's going to live in this digital environment. And, the reality showed up in their budget. The reality was you're selling $1 for 57 cents and that doesn't work. Right. That's not a business model. And, in the morning of all of the Convoyagers that lost their careers or have to make this sudden career change, which is, devastating. I think it was really lost how many brokers, small businesses that probably did have good fundamentals, that ran proper businesses that had EBITDA numbers that were in black ink and not red, that those businesses, how many of those were laid to rest by somebody like Convoy coming in and just dumping venture capital or private equity money into the marketplace to capture, wallet share that they just really never deserved.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I always think, or I reflected, I guess, they're presenting it or other folks are presenting it as the solution. And a key element of that is it's part of the solution, right? We sat in a customer meeting yesterday. I don't know if struggle is the right word, but translating human knowledge, intimate knowledge of our customers, our shippers and receivers into the technology, right? We added into location files, we have that expertise, et cetera, et cetera. But when you're talking about tracking mechanism and how do you get that to flag appropriately when the miles are not going to hit, or knowing that this receiver is going to have a $450 fine if you don't prioritize that delivery first, et cetera. Those nuances, I understand that well, I don't understand in some ways that Chat GPT or AI is going to solve some of those problems. But when you're in it on a day-to-day basis at 10 a.m. trying to get to talk to Tina on the dock at UNFI so you can maybe get a 30-minute buffer, they can't, their Chat GPT or AI can't do that.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's a really interesting element.
What's up, truckers? If you're loving this episode of the Truck Yeah podcast, I guarantee you'll also love Zipline Logistics' newest ebook. It's called Leveraging Shipper Intelligence Technology to Navigate Supply Chain Issues. And this amazing ebook dives deep into how you can select the best shipping technology to maximize your brand's ROI, a peek into what technology that's out there, and everything you need to know about Zipline's proprietary shipping intelligence tool, Canopy. And you want to know the best part? It's completely free. So you can download the ebook by visiting www.ziplinelogistics.com or by simply clicking the link in the show notes. This is an amazing resource that you don't want to miss out on the opportunity to check out. So go download it right now. Now, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we talk about all the time when we're walking through specifically the consolidation portion of Canopy, like when we're walking through that. I mean, I think this is the time that we pull it out the most, but it's true all the time. The beauty of, and this it may be a little off topic, but the way that we approach, managed transportation, right? Or the way that we approach, delivering logistics performance is using technology to empower our people. The way that we characterize, that those fundamentals, like how important it is to be, person to person, hand to hand combat, is when we talk about consolidation, we can explain to folks that, hey, yes, within the technology, we have all the rules of all of these retailers. We know what their delivery policies are, and they're all built into the technology. And the technology, gives our people the opportunity to see everything that they need to see to make the right decisions in one place. But what's almost more important than what's in the technology is that also the person that's making these decisions is dealing hand to hand with these locations and can say, oh, you know what, this UNFI location has been holding my drivers for like 3 or 4 hours at a time lately. And I can't I can't make that a first stop because they're going to hold my driver and then I'm going to be in date. And those are things that, again, to your point, like maybe one day there's going to be some data point that ChatGPT can pull out of our
systems,
text, but I don't know what that data point would be. And if you want to perform in our space, in consumer goods, retail, if you want to deliver, 98% on time in full, you've got to be active. You have to be, it takes touches to make that happen. And anybody, whether they're tech backed or they're, throwing bodies at the problem, anyone who tells you that you can have that at the bottom dollar is blowing smoke up your ass, right? It's just not going to happen. The marketplace does not exist for that level of service at that price.
It's a great call out. And that's certainly part of our notes here, talking to CPG shippers specifically, right? We understand that there's savings to be had, especially in this market of 2023, but at what cost, truly? And you make a great example of discussing the balance of getting your freight on the shelf and the cost and the fines that are associated with that if you don't, versus your transportation spend, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, God, I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but let's say on a $1 million freight spend, the difference between the average on time and full performance, which is 77% according to Walmart, according to retailers, versus 98%, which we deliver. Forget about the fines. The fines are massive, obviously, depending on your product and how expensive it is per unit. But just on out of stock costs, just your product not being on the shelf when it's supposed to be on the shelf, is $84,000, I believe, on a per $1 million in revenue. That's a gross margin impact, right? It's a humongous impact for someone, selling $1 million worth of their product into retail. And obviously extrapolate that out, right? On $10 million, it's $800,000.
Right.
The numbers only get larger and more dramatic and make it more clear that you have to be focused on shelf performance.
So when you talk about, hey, you're having a discussion with us, our rate's $550. We deliver at 98%, but you're going to give it to someone for $525. That's where you're stepping over dollars to pick up pennies.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of that is an issue of like sort of siloed functions, right? People making transportation decisions are oftentimes told, go out and get 3 rates and take the cheapest one. That's what you have to do. That's your job. And I pay you, $80,000 a year to go do that, to go save me, $90,000 in transportation. And yeah, that $90,000 could cost you way more than $90,000, and likely will, right? I mean, the way that these retailers set up their incentives or their carrots and their sticks, right? They're going to make absolutely sure that you will never save so much money picking, subpar transportation providers as you will, spend in fees and fines and out of stocks.
Right.
Why would they incentivize you any other way?
Yeah.
They need your product on the shelf.
They need it on the shelf. Absolutely. They want to sell it. So have you heard anything recently about the challenges or new developments in the freight world? I haven't really heard much around their customer base and how that's going to impact other third-party logistics providers or other transportation providers. Have you heard anything around that?
Specific to Convoy?
Or just that? Yeah, I mean, it's $800 million in revenue, right? So I assume in a lot of cases you would anticipate that, all right, it's just going to go down a routing guide, right? If they were number one, congrats, it's going to number two. And in this market, the acceptance percentage is so high that great.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what's going on. I don't think that anyone's feeling it at all. They were, from what I understood, mostly anecdotally. Well, there was some news, right? They were. I think Unilever was an early adopter. I don't know if Unilever was still a user of theirs when they went under, but I certainly heard a lot of like the very, very, very large, kind of mega cap CPG and mega cap shippers were parts of their client base. And, those guys are running, enormous routing guides and have plenty of redundancy. I don't think that there was any real concern there. I do think it's really interesting that Flexport is buying the technology.
Yeah. Recent development.
Yeah. And the assumption that all these shippers and carriers are going to be willing to just come right back is an interesting, they must know more than I do, right? I would see people being twice shy after getting bitten like that. But also Flexport's had a lot going on, right? And a lot of tumult there and seems to be, not really in a much different boat than what Convoy was in the first place. So, I'm really intrigued. I get the acquisition. I mean, it makes a world of sense, from a strategy perspective, if you've got the money to keep building at Flexport. But I'd be really intrigued to see whether or not carriers actually come back into that environment.
That mix, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially those that have been burned, assuming they can stay afloat, right? Like you mentioned at the top.
Yeah. And I don't know, I know that in a typical financing engagement, right, any carriers that are owed should be sort of in first position to collect, but that's assuming that there's money to be had, right?
Right.
And I really don't know how many of those carriers. I know that they talked a lot about how their network was primarily owner ops and mom and pops that really lived on that app.
Yeah.
I hope they're getting paid.
Right.
But even if they do get paid, I'd be shocked that somebody would then make the decision to turn around and kind of
go back to it.
Go right back. Yeah.
Teddy, as the director of training and development, are we changing any strategies as far as what we're telling our day-to-day ops folks to do with this news, or?
No, honestly, no. Yeah. I mean, everything that we're doing and some of the things that we try to get through at the very beginning of onboarding is understanding a market cycle and understanding how much this industry changes. And when kind of reading back on how Convoy did things, I didn't see that. I didn't see them talking or understanding market cycles or understanding the half-life of the data that they're using, which I don't understand data that well, but I understand that from our IT team. And those are the things that we're getting across, is that those changes have to happen. They have to be welcomed and they have to be applied.
Right.
So if you aren't understanding that the current market cycle won't end for another 52 weeks, then you're kind of at a disadvantage. Mm-hmm. So those are the things that we're kind of reiterating, which have been iterated since I stared 12 years ago. How long have I been here?
12 years.
12 years ago.
Yeah, service first, right?
Yeah.
It's a pretty simple concept, difficult execution.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with that.
And I think that's going to become, I think the story of 2024, when I think about, and we talked about this yesterday, like when I think about what's going on out there between, what we see in what our publicly reporting competitors are doing, when we read all the freight industry rags that tell us about, cuts happening at 3PLs of all sizes, right? Everywhere from, mom and pops shutting down to very, very large 3PLs, making, 10 and 20% cuts to their staff. Those cuts, they don't represent a leap forward in technological capability. They're not cutting staff because they don't need people tracking freight anymore. Those people had a purpose, right? 6 months ago or 12 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
what they're doing is deciding to touch your freight less, right? They're cutting the resources that are dedicated to making your freight move. And when I see that environment against one where, the expectation is that hundreds of thousands of drivers have to leave the marketplace in order for us to start to achieve equilibrium, what I see is the opportunity for a lot of service failures, right? A lot of bad behavior out of desperate trucking companies, a lot of poor tracking and poor resource allocation coming out of third parties and intermediaries. Again, for us specifically, we sell into a very specific value set, people that want service, that want on-shelf performance, that want to achieve, retail SLAs. If that's you, there's a lot of opportunity for failure and for conflict of interests, coming forward in the next year. And I think really, that's going to be a lot of the story that's told, at least in the CPG logistics space.
Zipline's doubling down on service, baby.
That's right.
You heard it here first. Well, thank you, Andrew, for joining us. Very impressive and important insights around the Convoy development. If anyone has any questions, reach out to us, 888-GO-ZIPLINE, www.ziplinelogistics.com. Thanks again for joining us on another edition of the Zipline Logistics podcast. We'll see you next time.